You don't belong in first class." The words weren't whispered, they were hurled sharp, loud enough to make heads lift from pillows and magazines. Every passenger within 10 rows turned. Nicole Harris, flight attendant, stood with her arm extended, finger leveled at the man in seat 2 amperes. Her navy blazer looked pressed sharp enough to cut, her jaw tight as if the air itself had offended her. Behind her, Captain Daniel Pierce folded his arms across his chest, the white bars on his shoulder gleaming, his expression a blend of irritation and authority. And seated between them, unmoving, was Marcus Carter. Plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, no watch, no jewelry. Just a quiet man whose calm filled the silence after the insult. He tilted his chin, not in defiance but in measured disbelief, as if he'd heard this line before and was waiting for the encore. Gasps flickered through the cabin. A woman 2 rows back pulled her phone halfway out of her purse, then thought better of it. A college kid across the aisle mouthed, "What's happening?" to his seatmate. Nicole's tone sharpened. "Sir, this cabin is reserved. If you don't move, we'll have security escort you off this flight." Her words echoed, riding the recycled air like a warning siren. Marcus's eyes didn't waver. He sat steady, broad shoulders relaxed against the leather seat. When he finally spoke, it wasn't louder than a conversation. "This is my seat, 2 amperes." That's when the murmurs began. Passengers shifting, whispering. A man in a blazer muttered, "Looks like economy to me." Someone further back whispered, "That's discrimination." The captain stepped closer, voice cutting, "Sir, comply now. We have VIP passengers waiting. You don't want to make this worse." But worse was already here. The whole cabin held its breath, eyes locked on a single man in a gray shirt surrounded by uniforms and hostility. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus Carter. Nicole snatched the boarding pass from Marcus's tray, glanced at it, and with one swift tear split it down the middle. The sound was small, but the insult was deafening. She let the halves fall like scraps. "Not in those jeans," she hissed. "Not in first class." Marcus's gaze didn't flicker. His silence was heavier than any outburst. And in that stillness, the storm inside the cabin only gathered force. Marcus Carter did not dress for recognition. He dressed for silence. The gray t-shirt clung comfortably to his frame, jeans faded but clean, sneakers muted white. To most eyes, he looked like another tired traveler, a man who belonged anywhere but seat 2 amperes. And that was the point. Marcus wasn't flying to Los Angeles for leisure. He wasn't on his way to a beach or a meeting with investors. He was already the investor. A billionaire CEO whose signature alone could ground a plane or expand a fleet. 25% of Horizon Airlines sat in his portfolio shares, bought, earned, defended across decades of work. But none of that was visible here. Not tonight. Not to Nicole. Not to the captain glowering behind her. Marcus had built his career on being underestimated. He learned early that power rarely looked the way people expected. At 25, fresh from graduate school, he'd shown up to a job interview at a regional airline in slacks and a crisp shirt. The manager never looked past his skin. "Not the image we're looking for," they'd said. That rejection burned itself into memory. Fuel, every deal, every late night, every acquisition carried the echo of those words, not the image. Now, at 47, he was back on an airplane this time, not begging for a paycheck but sitting in a seat he owned twice over. And still, the image was questioned. He carried no entourage, no gold watch glinting under cabin lights, no briefcase branded with initials. His wealth was measured in silence, in patience, in the way his eyes held steady even as authority tried to shove him out of view. A young trainee flight attendant stood frozen near the galley, her clipboard clutched tight. She had scanned his ticket earlier. It had flashed green, valid. She knew the truth, but her voice trembled inside her throat. To speak now would mean defying Nicole. To stay quiet would mean complicity. Passengers whispered, some leaning forward, others sinking back. A woman whispered to her husband, "Why would he sit there if it wasn't his?" A man muttered, "Probably fake." Marcus remained still, the same stillness he held at boardroom tables when rivals underestimated him, the same stillness he carried into banks that once called him high risk. It was not the stillness of submission, It was the stillness of someone who knew storms collapse under their own weight. And so he let the seconds pass, let the air thicken, let the cabin believe what it wanted. His patience was not weakness. It was the quiet edge of power. Nicole's finger jabbed closer, her voice rising to fill the cabin. "Sir, this is your last chance. Stand up or be removed." Marcus didn't blink. His voice came low, deliberate. "My name is on that seat." The words landed flat, quiet, but they carried more weight than shouting ever could. The passengers didn't yet know who he was, but they were about to learn what silence in the face of arrogance really meant. Brian Foster strolled up from the galley, younger, smug, his tie loosened just enough to look careless. He looked Marcus up and down the way someone sizes up a misplaced bag. A chuckle escaped his throat, sharp enough to draw attention. "Yeah, man. You sure you're in the right place? Looks like economy's more your style." The insult wasn't just words. It was a performance, delivered loud enough for the nearby rows to hear, for the passengers leaning over armrests to catch. A ripple of laughter, awkward and uncertain, skittered through the cabin like static. Marcus didn't move. His gaze slid to Brian, calm, unshaken, then back to the headrest in front of him. He had learned long ago that silence was louder than banter. Nicole wasn't finished. She stepped closer, lowering her voice but sharpening the blade. "People try this all the time. Fake passes, printed at home. You think we haven't seen it before?" Marcus exhaled slowly, his voice steady. "Scan it again." Ugh. But the pass was already in tatters, halves drifting like dead leaves at his feet. From row 4, a woman pulled out her phone fully this time. Emma Larson, 38 Midwestern, her brow furrowed. She whispered to her seatmate, "Michael Grant, this is discrimination. He hasn't done a thing wrong." Michael nodded, already tapping record. Behind them, a teenager leaned toward his mother. "Why won't they just check the system?" The mother pressed her lips thin. "Because they don't want to." In the galley, the trainee Mia Lang clutched her clipboard harder, knuckles whitening. She had seen the scan turn green. She had entered his name. She knew the truth, yet fear anchored her in place. Nicole's eyes had already warned her. Silence or consequences. Captain Pierce stepped forward, posture rigid. His voice rolled like authority practiced over decades. "Sir, I'll say this once. Vacate the seat or you will be escorted off. We have priority passengers who need it." Two figures appeared behind him, a wealthy couple, Richard and Laura Bennett, champagne flutes still in hand, platinum tags dangling like credentials of royalty. They lingered just behind the captain, expectant, as if the seat had always been theirs to claim. Passengers stirred. Some looked at Marcus with pity, others with judgment. A man whispered, "Why is he making a scene?" Another muttered, "This is going to get ugly." Ugh. Brian leaned in again, voice dripping with amusement. "Policy's policy. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his body stayed composed. He raised his eyes, letting them rest on the captain, then the Bennetts, then back to Nicole. His silence made them twitch. Injustice wasn't new. It never surprised him. But the cabin, this stage, this audience, they were about to witness what happened when arrogance tried to erase truth. The storm was building, and Marcus Carter had no intention of moving. The aisle felt like a courtroom, now rows of leather seats forming silent juries, every glance a verdict waiting to be cast. Nicole's words still hung in the recycled air, jagged, unfinished. Brian smirked as if he'd already won. Captain Pierce loomed, a shadow draped in authority, and yet Marcus did not move. He leaned back slightly, the creak of the seat almost defiant. His breathing stayed steady, a rhythm at odds with the turbulence of voices around him. One hand rested lightly on the armrest, the other on his thigh. No fists, no gestures, just stillness, the kind of stillness that made people nervous. "This is my seat," Marcus repeated, voice low, calm, unyielding. 2 amperes. The restraint in his tone was deliberate. He knew better than to feed the fire with anger. Rage was what they expected. Silence, however, that unnerved them. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Emma held her phone lower, whispering into the mic. "He's not yelling, not even once. They're the only ones raising voices." Michael, beside her, muttered, "That's why this is worse." Nicole scoffed. "Calm won't save you. Security's already on standby." She straightened her blazer, as though the fabric itself could shield her from accountability. Marcus's eyes lifted, steady, precise. "Then let them come." The words weren't a challenge. They were a mirror reflecting her own hostility back at her, forcing her to hear the absurdity aloud. Mia Lang, the trainee, felt her stomach twist. She had seen power misused before, but never with this calm refusal pressing against it. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. She wanted to speak, to say she had scanned his ticket, that it was real, but Nicole's presence was a wall she wasn't ready to climb. Not yet. Brian leaned closer, his grin thin and crooked. Man, you're making this harder than it has to be. Marcus didn't even turn his head. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that only the closest rows caught it. What's hard is watching arrogance think it's law. The sentence dropped into the cabin like a stone into water, ripples of murmurs spreading outward. Passengers glanced at one another, unsure whether to agree aloud or keep their silence. The captain's jaw tightened. He was used to compliance, to passengers folding the moment his voice cut through. But this man, this quiet man in a gray shirt, wasn't folding. He was anchoring the entire aisle in place with composure alone. The seconds stretched, tension coiling tighter. Nicole folded her arms. Brian shifted, uneasy for the first time. The Bennetts exchanged glances, their champagne no longer sweet. Marcus remained still, a figure rooted in patience. The kind of patience that didn't beg, didn't break, didn't bend. And the cabin began to realize silence wasn't weakness. It was warning. The first phone lifted quietly, like a flare in the dark. Emma Larson angled her camera just above the headrest, lens catching Nicole's posture, Brian's grin, the captain's folded arms. She whispered into the mic, "This is discrimination. Everyone can see it." Michael Grant, beside her, raised his own phone, muttering, "We're documenting everything. This won't vanish." The red recording lights blinked in unison, tiny witnesses glowing in the dim cabin. Across the aisle, a teenager pressed his face to the window, then whispered to his mother, "He's not even doing anything." She shushed him softly, though her own eyes stayed fixed on Marcus, her lips tight with quiet outrage. The hush was breaking. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into fragments of protest. "Why won't they check?" He showed the pass. "This is wrong." Marcus didn't look at the phones, didn't acknowledge the cameras. His voice, when it came, was directed at Nicole alone. "Run the system again." Nicole shook her head, smirk sharp. "Doesn't matter. You're not verified. Not in those clothes. Not in this cabin." Mia Lang's grip tightened on her clipboard. She had seen the green scan. She had logged his name. Her conscience screamed louder than Nicole's words, but fear pressed down on her chest. Trainees weren't supposed to speak during escalation. One wrong move and her career could evaporate before it began. Still, her thumb slid across her phone, screen dimmed. She tapped the record button on her voice memo app, tucking the device into her jacket pocket. Her heart pounded, but her resolve hardened. If she couldn't speak, she could at least preserve the truth. 2 rows back, a businessman muttered into his own phone camera, "We're watching a man get humiliated for sitting in his paid seat. This is absurd." A ripple of agreement traveled through the row. The captain's patience thinned. "Enough chatter," Pierce snapped, his voice commanding the entire cabin. "Security will handle this. Everyone remain seated." But the passengers weren't still anymore. They shifted, leaned, whispered louder. The quiet unity of strangers began to take shape, fueled not by friendship but by shared disbelief. Marcus stayed steady, hands folded loosely on his lap. He didn't encourage them, didn't gesture for help. His silence invited them to see, to decide for themselves what was unfolding in front of their eyes. And they did. Emma's voice rose louder this time, no longer just for her phone. "He has a valid ticket. I saw it scan," Michael added. "You can't just erase someone because you don't like how they look." Mia swallowed hard. Her lips parted. Her voice didn't come not yet, but the battle inside her chest had begun. The witnesses were no longer silent shadows. The cabin itself was waking up. Captain Pierce's voice cut the air like a gavel. "Sir, this is your final warning. Vacate the seat or you'll be escorted off this aircraft immediately." The words weren't just procedure, they were theater. His jaw tightened, shoulders squared, the kind of posture drilled over decades in the cockpit. Behind him, the Bennetts shifted impatiently, as though the delay were a personal insult. Richard whispered, "We were promised this seat," loud enough for row 3 to hear. Nicole leaned into the moment, her smirk sharper. She scooped the torn halves of Marcus's boarding pass from the floor, held them up, and let them flutter down like discarded evidence. Nothing valid about this. Not in those jeans. The contempt laced every syllable, a blade honed by assumption. Gasps rippled. Emma's phone caught the motion, Michael's too. The recordings multiplied. Every seat in sight became a silent camera stand. Brian stepped forward, voice carrying down the aisle. "Listen, man, you're embarrassing yourself. Economy's got space. Save us all the trouble." He chuckled as if the cruelty was casual every day. Marcus remained still. He didn't flinch when the pass fell, didn't blink when Brian mocked him. His calm drew the tension tighter, like a rope pulled past, breaking. Mia Lang's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, wanted to shout that the system had shown green, that the pass was real, but Nicole's glare pinned her silent. Instead, her hand hovered over her phone in her jacket pocket, thumb pressing the red recording button harder. Every insult captured, every lie archived. Passengers stirred. A man in row 5 leaned into the aisle, muttering, "He's not yelling. Why are they?" A woman clutched her daughter's hand tighter, shaking her head in disbelief. Captain Pierce barked again. "Remove him now." Nicole nodded, her voice sharp as glass. "Security's en route." She turned to Marcus, lips curling. "You can walk out, or you can be dragged. Your choice." Her words struck the cabin like sparks on dry wood. Murmurs grew louder, indignation breaking its shell. Emma raised her voice. "Dragged? For sitting in his seat?" Michael added. "We're all watching. This is going online." But Nicole didn't waver. Brian crossed his arms, smirk wide, like the verdict was already sealed. The captain's stare hardened, daring Marcus to resist, and Marcus anchored. Patient let their threats stack higher, brick by brick. His silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Because storms collapse when their own weight becomes too heavy, and the storm in this cabin was close to breaking. The cabin tensed like a wire about to snap. Nicole bent over her tablet, tapping with practiced precision. The glow from the screen lit her face as she muttered, "Deleting now." Seconds later, she looked up, triumph in her eyes. There, no record of Marcus Carter in seat 2 amperes. The erasure was invisible to most, but Mia saw it. She saw the empty line where his name had been. She saw Nicole's finger swipe across the screen with intent, not error. Her stomach turned. Brian laughed under his breath, leaning against the galley wall. "See? Nothing there. No proof. Just another wannabe trying to play first class." His chuckle wasn't private. It was aimed at the rows behind him, bait for complicity. Passengers stirred louder now. Emma's voice cracked with disbelief. "She just erased his name. I saw it." Michael muttered into his phone. "This is fraud by the staff, not him." "Oh." Richard Bennett stepped forward, smug, sliding into seat 2 amperes as if the dispute had ended. Laura followed, adjusting her shawl, sipping her champagne without meeting Marcus's eyes. "Problem solved," Richard whispered to his wife. But the cabin wasn't convinced. Murmurs swelled, phrases like, "That's not right," and "He showed ID," rippling down the aisle. Nicole wasn't done. She bent low, her voice dripping disdain. "You don't belong here. Not in those jeans. Not in this cabin. People like you should know your place." The words landed heavy, acidic. Phones caught every syllable. A passenger gasped audibly. Another muttered, "Did she really just say that?" Marcus's expression didn't shift. He looked at the Bennetts in his seat, at Nicole holding her tablet like a weapon, at Brian's smug lean. Then he exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that came not from weakness, but from a patience sharpened over decades. "This is my seat," he said again, calm even. "And your erasure changes nothing." Nicole straightened, scoffing. "Erasure? You don't exist in this system anymore. And without the system, you're nothing." Her voice cracked at the end, though she didn't notice. But the passengers did. Emma's camera caught the tremor. Michael's mic caught the slip. Mia's hand shook as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She pressed the record stop, then save. A file name appeared. Flight 623, evidence, because the truth wasn't gone. It had been captured, preserved, waiting for the right moment. The climax wasn't Marcus raising his voice. It was Nicole burying herself deeper, blind to the fact that every insult was a nail in her own coffin. The cabin was no longer neutral. It was restless, angry, awake, and Marcus Carter hadn't moved an inch. The cabin lights hummed, a sterile buzz against the rising murmur of passengers. Nicole stood tall, tablet pressed against her chest like a shield. Brian leaned into the galley wall, arms crossed, smirk carved into his face. Captain Pierce shifted his weight, voice ready to summon security over the intercom. And Marcus moved, not with anger, not with force, but with purpose. He slipped one hand into his pocket, retrieved his phone, and raised it just enough to catch the faint glow of the screen. He tapped once on his AirPods. "Rachel," he said, voice low, calm, cutting through the noise. "Log this. Alert the board immediately." The words weren't meant for the cabin. They were meant for the people who held the airline's future in their hands. But the passengers heard them, clear as steel. Heads turned. Emma lowered her phone a fraction, whispering to Michael, "The board? Did he say board?" Nicole barked a laugh, brittle, sharp. "What board? Nobody's listening to you." She gestured toward Brian. "He's stalling. Get security." Marcus's gaze didn't shift. "Record the following," he continued, ignoring her completely. "Boarding pass torn. Name erased from system. Discriminatory remarks logged." Rachel's voice came crisp through his ear. "Confirmed. Time-stamped. Transmission secure." Brian's smirk faltered. "What is he doing?" he muttered. Nicole waved him off, louder this time. "He's bluffing. Just some guy with a phone." But the cabin didn't buy it. Passengers leaned closer, phones still rolling. A mother in row 6 whispered, "That didn't sound like bluffing." Marcus lowered his hand, phone resting in his palm, his posture unbroken. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness," he said softly, words slicing across the aisle. "That's your last mistake," Nicole scoffed, though her eyes flickered toward the passengers, unsettled by the shift in air. Captain Pierce pressed his lips tight, unsettled by a confidence he couldn't ground. Mia Lang's chest pounded. She clutched her phone tighter, the saved audio file heavy in her pocket. She hadn't dared speak yet, but Marcus's calm had cracked something in her. If he could stand against them without raising his voice, maybe she could too. Richard Bennett cleared his throat from seat 2 amperes, shifting uncomfortably. Laura sipped her champagne slower now, eyes darting to the recording phones around them. The performance of privilege no longer felt untouchable. Rachel's voice came again in Marcus's ear, sharp, deliberate. "Board members notified. Legal is monitoring. Continue splendid." Marcus's gaze swept the cabin. Not over the crew, but over the passengers, the witnesses, the cameras, the strangers now invested. He didn't need to shout. He just needed to let them watch the storm unravel. The counterattack had begun. Not with fists, not with rage, but with protocol. And protocol, once awakened, didn't back down. The aisle was no longer a place of transit. It had become a stage, and every row was an audience pressed into silence. Phones glowed like tiny spotlights, recording every breath, every twitch of defiance. Nicole clutched her tablet tighter, her confidence thinning. "Security will be here any second," she declared, but her voice cracked, betrayed by nerves she couldn't hide. Marcus rose slowly from his seat. The motion alone shifted the cabin. The Bennetts flinched, Laura pulling her shawl close, Richard clearing his throat as if to justify why he was in a chair that wasn't his. Passengers leaned forward, anticipation pooling like static before a storm. For the first time, Marcus let the weight of his presence fill the space. Broad-shouldered, calm, deliberate, he scanned the cabin. His eyes weren't pleading. They were measuring, like a man assessing a balance sheet he already knew was in his favor. "You've torn my boarding pass," he said, voice steady, every syllable carrying. "You've erased my name from the system. You've called me a fraud, a trespasser, a thief." His gaze locked on Nicole, then Brian, then the captain. And all of it was recorded. Every word, every action. Nicole sneered. "Big talk. Nobody believes you." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained composed. "Belief isn't required. Facts are." He let the pause hang, long enough for Emma's phone to catch the hush in the cabin. Then he delivered the strike. "I am Marcus Carter, CEO, founder, 25% owner of Horizon Airlines, the very company whose uniform you wear, whose paycheck you cash, whose reputation you just dragged through the aisle of this aircraft." The sentence detonated in the cabin. Gasps rippled through rows, shock bouncing seat to seat. Emma's hand trembled, her camera steady only because adrenaline held it firm. Michael muttered, "Oh my God," as his recording continued. Richard Bennett's face drained, his smug posture collapsing into uneasy fidgeting. Laura set her glass down hard, liquid spilling at her feet. Brian blinked rapidly, Smirk gone, his voice caught in his throat. Nicole's lips parted, words dying before they formed. Captain Pierce shifted back, color draining beneath the weight of authority that no longer belonged to him. The passengers erupted not in chaos, but in recognition. A young man whispered, "I saw him in Forbes." A woman muttered, "That's the Carter Group guy." Another, louder now, "He owns this airline." Phones rose higher, catching faces paling in real time. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. His tone stayed cold, measured, unflinching. "You told me I don't belong here. You erased me from a system I built. You dragged my name through the cabin of an airline I own." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the passengers who now sat stunned, breathless. "The problem wasn't my seat. The problem was your vision of who belongs in it." Silence fell, heavy, absolute, the kind of silence that wasn't emptiness, it was judgment. And in that silence, the storm broke. The cabin cracked open like glass under pressure. Richard Bennett slid awkwardly out of seat 2 amperes, the false comfort gone from his face. Laura dabbed at the champagne pooled by her feet, cheeks burning with shame she couldn't sip away. Passengers murmured louder now, no longer whispers but verdicts spoken plain. Emma lowered her phone just long enough to say, "I knew it. I knew he wasn't lying." Michael leaned toward the aisle, voice firm. "And you all tried to erase him." His recording light still burned red. Nicole's composure shattered. Her smirk dissolved into stammer. This is a misunderstanding," she managed, but her voice shook, brittle as paper. She glanced at Brian, searching for backup. He avoided her eyes, his earlier bravado gone, hands twitching at his sides. Captain Pierce shifted his weight uneasily, authority leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. His voice, once sharp, now cracked. "Sir, perhaps we can resolve this differently." "Number." Marcus's word cut like steel. Calm, final. "This isn't about resolution. This is about accountability." The passengers responded. Clapping began hesitant at first, one pair of hands from the back row, then another, then swelling into a wave that filled the cabin. Applause thundered through the narrow space, drowning out every protest, every excuse. The sound wasn't polite. It was judgment, collective and raw. Mia Lang finally stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her spine held. "Captain, I scanned his ticket. It was valid. Nicole deleted his name herself, and I recorded what she said." She pulled her phone from her pocket, thumb hovering over the file that carried truth like dynamite. Nicole spun on her, eyes blazing. "You're lying." Mia didn't flinch. "Number you are." Her words rang louder than her small frame should have allowed, and the passengers cheered. Emma lifted her phone again, pointing it at Mia. "Say it again." Mia swallowed, steadied her breath. "His past was real. They tore it up. They lied." The crowd erupted once more, murmurs of "unbelievable." "She's brave." "This is corruption." Marcus didn't move, didn't clap, didn't raise his voice. He stood still, letting the tide turn on its own. His silence had become gravity, pulling truth into orbit around him. Nicole's face drained of color. Brian muttered, "We're finished," though he said it under his breath. Captain Pierce pinched the bridge of his nose, as if a headache could excuse complicity. The cabin wasn't just awake, it was united. Every camera, every witness, every voice now aligned against the crew who had turned arrogance into policy. And at the center stood Marcus Carter, no longer the quiet man in a gray shirt, but the reckoning they had summoned with their own hands. The panic had begun, and there would be no escaping it. The applause hadn't faded when Marcus raised a hand. Instantly, the cabin quieted not because he demanded it, but because authority had shifted. He reached for his phone again, voice low but crisp. "Rachel," he said into his AirPods, "initiate termination protocol. Nicole Harris, Brian Foster, Captain Daniel Pierce, effective immediately. Remove access and privileges." Rachel's reply was instant, razor sharp. "Confirmed. Credentials revoked. Executing now." A soft chime echoed from Nicole's tablet. She glanced down, confused then horrified. Her access badge flashed red across the screen. She tapped again, frantic, but the error only grew bolder. "Access denied." What is this?" her voice cracked. Brian pulled out his company-issued phone, but the lock screen had changed. His name had vanished from the roster, replaced with a single line, "Terminated." He paled, whispering, "No." No, 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 no. Captain Pierce's radio buzzed useless static. His access to the flight system cut mid-command. His jaw tightened as he pressed the button again and again, but the device stayed dead in his hand. He stared at Marcus, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Passengers gasped, phones capturing every second. Emma's voice trembled with awe. "He's firing them right here." On the plane, Michael added, "This is history. This is justice." Nicole's panic spilled into anger. She stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger. "You can't do this. You're just—" Marcus's eyes locked on hers, steady as steel. "I am not just anything. I am the owner of what you tried to erase. And now, I'm erasing you." The words cut deeper than any shout. Nicole staggered back, her authority crumbling. Mia, still clutching her phone, exhaled a shudder of relief. She looked at Marcus, eyes wide, and he gave a single nod, acknowledgement, gratitude, silent solidarity. The Bennetts sank lower into their seats, champagne forgotten, privilege pierced. Richard whispered to Laura, "We need to get off this flight." She shook her head, lips tight. Not before the cameras stopped rolling. The cabin wasn't hostile anymore. It was electric. A wave of vindication surged row to row, strangers nodding, clapping again, recording angles from every direction. Justice wasn't abstract. It was happening seat by seat, screen by screen. Nicole's shoulders sagged. Brian's arms dropped. The captain's eyes dulled. They weren't crew anymore. They weren't in control. They were relics of arrogance, stripped bare in front of hundreds of witnesses. Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't break his calm. He simply lowered his phone and spoke to the cabin. They no longer work for Horizon Airlines, and they never will again. The declaration sealed the moment. Passengers erupted, some clapping, some cheering, some whispering in disbelief. Every camera caught it, every voice carried it. On Flight 623, justice had arrived not through shouting, not through force, but through power revealed at the precise moment it was needed. And the crew who once believed they controlled the aisle now stood stripped, silent, erased. The roar of clapping ebbed into a hush, a silence so dense it pressed against the cabin walls. Passengers leaned forward, phones still raised, waiting for the man in the gray shirt to finish what he had begun. Marcus didn't pace. He didn't shout. He stood anchored in the center of first class, the empty seat 2 amperes beside him like a symbol reclaimed. His eyes swept the aisle slowly, pausing on each face, witnesses, skeptics, allies, even the fallen crew. "You thought a seat defined me," he said, voice calm but carrying to the back row. "You thought clothes erased credibility." That silence meant weakness. He let the words linger, heavier than turbulence. "But you were wrong. My worth doesn't vanish because you refuse to see it." Nicole's tablet slipped from her trembling hands, clattering against the floor. Brian sat slumped against the galley wall, staring at nothing. Captain Pierce lowered his eyes, stripped of rank by truth itself. Marcus turned, facing the passengers directly. Some looked down, ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. Others nodded, eyes fierce with agreement. Emma kept filming, her hands steady now, knowing she was capturing history. "The problem was never my ticket," Marcus continued. "The problem was your vision of who belongs here. You looked at me and saw less. But I am not less. I am the one who built what you tried to deny me." A ripple of affirmation ran through the rows, soft, yes, quiet claps. The kind of response born not from spectacle but from resonance. People had seen themselves in that chair, in that dismissal, in that erasure. Marcus drew a breath, steady, deliberate. "I don't need a camera to prove what happened here. I don't need applause. I don't need to argue with arrogance." He paused, eyes narrowing on Nicole, Brian, and the captain. "I am the result of everything you tried to erase, and that is enough." The line landed like a verdict. Phones caught it, passengers absorbed it. The cabin itself seemed to exhale. Mia, still clutching her phone, whispered, "That's power." Her voice shook, but it was filled with awe. Emma echoed softly, "That's justice." Marcus lowered himself back into seat 2 amperes, not as a passenger reclaiming comfort, but as an owner reclaiming truth. The seatbelt clicked, final and absolute. The cabin remained hushed, reverent. Outside, the engines hummed, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. But inside, nothing felt the same. Because tonight, on Flight 623, dignity didn't shout. It stood. It endured. And in the end, it won.